Hello and welcome to the first episode of a brand new series here on the Striver channel called In the Spotlight. My name is Junior,
My name is Matt.
and every Monday we'll be highlighting a different fixture each day of the week, speaking about a range of subjects spanning from players who have played for both teams, historic matches, forgotten worldies, and plenty more.
We would love to hear your suggestions for any future fixtures, and without further ado, let's get right into Monday's matchup.
Okay, so Monday takes us to Italy, to Serie A, where Roma host Atalanta, and we're going to look at a specific player, a player who played for both teams, although I think he only actually made a couple of appearances for Atalanta, and that's Dani Osvaldo, Matt. Now, Danny, for fans of the Premier League, will remember he played for Southampton back in the day when they had a really solid team, and Danny himself scored an absolute worldie against Man City, which I think is forgotten about. Do you remember the goal, Matt?
I do, and to be honest, I think if anyone was to guess who we're talking about for Atalanta Roma, I think they could probably have about 100 guesses and not guess Dani Osvaldo, which is
Yeah.
the fun of this series, really. But no, I do remember the goal. I remember him vividly sitting down Vincent Company, Premier League legend, just putting one top corner. Proper Barclays, as you know, that Barclays men era came during the international break, and a pretty memorable goal to say the least. Which brings us on to the topic of what is your favourite goal? Anyone listening at home, let us know in the comments. What is your favourite Premier League goal? I will ask you, Junior. What's yours?
Oh wow, what a question. Do you know what? One that always there's two that come to mind, and they are a bit older. So hopefully the younger generation know the goals I'm talking about. But one of them is they both actually involve Newcastle. One of them is Wayne Rooney's goal against Newcastle. I think it was 2008, where he's actually on the floor. I think he's arguing with the ref, and then he gets up and just levers a volley from about 35 yards into the top corner. That for me is like one of the goals that always sticks in my mind. And the other one is for Newcastle, and it was Alan Shearer's volley, I think, against Everton, which again is just like I'm not a Newcastle fan, but those two goals, when I think about goals, especially in the Premier League, those two goals stick out for me.
You might have to confirm you're not a Newcastle fan at this rate. But no, I think you got two volleys, two power strikes. Probably can tell what type of goal you're a fan of. But two brilliant shouts, two phenomenal footballers.
Hmm.
And for me personally, I'm going a tiny bit closer to nowadays. I mean, I only got into football quite late as it is, but the goal which really sticks with me personally is Kasami's goal against Crystal Palace for Fulham.
Oh,
Touch from a tight angle,
beautiful.
bang, loops over the keeper, top corner, completely unstoppable. And not in the same type of vein, but I think another goal which is incredibly underrated. This time, Palace fans, don't worry, you don't need to click off that it's against your side because I'm going for a Palace player, Andros Townsend's volley against Manchester City. A truly
Another
memorable goal.
worldie.
Unbelievable. And, Palace always seem to have City's number for no real apparent reason, or at least used to. And that Townsend goal is just a thing of beauty.
Yeah, proper strike. I feel like there's definitely a volleys theme here with our goals. But yeah, let us know in the comments, guys. Dani Osvaldo's goal obviously wasn't a volley; it was a nice little turn, and he put it. I think it went bar in as well. It was a beautiful
Oh,
finish. But yeah, Dani Osvaldo, one of those players that I think was forgotten about, but was actually a bit of an icon back in the day. So let us know in the comments which iconic goal perhaps that you think is forgotten about. And yeah, that will take us on to Tuesday. So Tuesday takes us into a match flashback, and with Leicester hosted West Ham on Tuesday night, we're going to go back about 8 years to 2016, the year Leicester actually won the title in a memorable fixture when they were in the run-in to winning that famous crown. Leicester hosting the Hammers at the King Power Stadium. Jamie Vardy scored before actually controversially getting sent off. West Ham scored twice in the last 6 minutes, but a 95th minute penalty from
oh.
Leo Ojoa gave Leicester a point on their way to the title. And Matt, you're going to talk to us about Jamie Vardy and the legacy that he's creating in this unconventional route to the Premier League that he's had.
It's pretty special. I mean, you look at where he started, Fleetwood Town, the lower leagues of football, and I think you look at a lot of players nowadays who, come through a United's academy or Arsenal's academy or Liverpool's academy, and you forget that there is that incentive or that is that pathway for top players to come from the very bottom of football. Ollie Watkins is a modern day example, and Jamie Vardy, why we want to focus on him is his longevity is just ridiculous. The way he was so crucial, obviously, you mentioned that title winning season, a complete fairy tale, an unbelievable season. But it's his longevity, even this season, 37 years of age, the ability to still go at it so often, his availability generally, the goal against Spurs I remember earlier on in the season as well, and he's a bit of an icon, a bit of a Premier League hero legend. And I want to ask you, Junior, what do you think it is about Jamie Vardy which keeps him at the races at this point in his career?
I think for Vardy, I think it's his unorthodoxness, if that's a word. I think nowadays players are very structured, they're very formal, and they're kind of very safe. Whereas Vardy kind of goes against all of that. I think speaking of that Tottenham game, I think at half time it was like it was pictured that he was drinking a Red Bull in the tunnel or something, and
Classic.
that's Jamie Vardy in a nutshell, isn't it? He doesn't do things by the book. He never has done in his career, and that's why we love him as a player, as a character, because he's so unconventional. But it's also worked. He's climbed through the ladders. He's got a Premier League title. He's played in the Champions League, and still, what is he now? Like late 30s, I think. He's
37, I
still bagging
think.
them for Leicester. Yeah. So, yeah, I think for the Premier League for football, Jamie Vardy's a brilliant character.
Absolutely. And you remember as well that season where he achieved, the Premier League record, hold the famous commentary line from, I believe it was Martin Tyler, hold the front page, hold the back page. The guy was just completely unstoppable. And obviously, Leicester had a few key pillars in that title winning season, but his longevity, his consistency, you look at some of these numbers, you look at this season, he's played 11, scored 4, and assisted 1. When you consider the side he's playing for and his age and everything like that, you go back to 21-22 where he got 15 goals in 25 games. You're looking at 24 goal contributions in 2020 to 21, 28 out of 35 games in 2019-20. Like, these are numbers you associate with the very top players, and he is
Yeah.
exactly that.
He's clutch, and he has been for Leicester for a long time now. And so we want to know in the comments, guys, which players do you think have the best legacy in the Premier League, or the most unique legacy? Let us know in the comments.
Wednesday, what does that bring us on to? Arsenal versus Manchester United at the Emirates, an absolute classic. But what are we going to be focusing on? Not Amarim at the minute, not Mikel Arteta and Arsenal's recent resurgence. More on the past, and particularly for myself as an Arsenal fan, a bit of a sensitive topic. Talking about players who have happened to play for both teams, and there are some very controversial ones.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're gonna name not all of them, but just a few who in recent years have crossed that line from Gooner to Red Devil. And what I'm gonna ask you, Matt, to do as an Arsenal fan is rate the transfer and how controversial it was, because I think some of these are still maybe a touchy subject for you today. So we'll kick it off to one of the biggest ones, Robin van Persie, RVP, the Dutchman leaving Arsenal to join Man United, and of course helping Sir Alex win what was his final Premier League title, if I'm not mistaken.
Frustrating to say the least. I mean, as you say, they're quite sensitive topics, and he is at the very top of that list. I mean, you've got people nowadays even relatively preying on his downfall at, you know, even in the Eredivisie. I can't exactly remember what team he manages, but yeah, such a sensitive topic. For me personally, I actually got into football very, very late, so this one didn't impact me that significantly. But the
Okay.
the principle of it is just not very fun, is it? Going from leading the line at Arsenal, such a key player, to going to such a rival, hitting the ground, the way he's acted since. I'm sure very pretty much absolutely no Arsenal fan will be objecting that this one rates probably about a 10 out of 10 in terms of frustration and the reality of it. But obviously, he had a phenomenal few years at United too, and he was such a top footballer. And it's a shame that I even need to talk about him in a great light in that regard.
Well, I mean, I guess a couple of years later, we had a swap deal again, one that was controversial, one a player that wanted to leave Arsenal for Old Trafford, Alexis Sanchez, and a player that went the other way was Henrik Mkhitaryan. Neither kind of made their impact though, did they? I mean, the player that Sanchez was at Arsenal compared to the player that Sanchez was at United, I can imagine as an Arsenal fan, sorry, seeing him kind of not deliver at United, maybe that gave you a good feeling.
I mean, it's such a weird one because you look at Alexis Sanchez and you look at the player he was for Arsenal, such a difference maker, such a fun player to watch, quite a high risk, high reward player. But you know, he was an elite forward, someone who was getting compared to the likes of Eden Hazard, and you don't do that without being a top footballer. And I think you look at that move to United and you think that there was that summer before where Arsenal nearly signed Thomas Lemar and then Alexis Sanchez nearly joined Man City. And I don't think people would have begrudged him for joining Man City because of the level City were at. And it was at a point where, okay, if he leaves Arsenal, he's going to join one of the very best clubs in the world who are winning Premier League titles. And then to see him join United, do little and no, obviously that famous piano announcement was a bit of sour grapes. And you know, I can't pretend like I didn't absolutely love the player. And obviously, you know, it's good to see he still had a good longevity in Italy with Inter Milan and a few others. But it's a sour one. And then as for Henrik Mkhitaryan, a very interesting one. I mean, he's quite a likeable player for both, despite being too influential. You know, you look at him, for me, when he was at Arsenal, I felt he was a good player and, you know, like a good creative player, but also quite a high risk, high reward player, a bit frustrating to watch. And once again, it's amazing to see the career he's had at Inter Milan. So, in terms of rating, I'd probably give Sanchez impact wise maybe like a 6 out of 10, particularly given what you're expecting. And Henrik
Mm.
Mkhitaryan, a 5 out of 10, once again, you know, not didn't quite live up to the Dortmund days he originally started his career with, but that's not to say that there's any sour grapes in the slightest. And yeah, two well, one top player when he was at Arsenal, and then that's what happens.
Yeah, it kind of fell through for both players, didn't it? And then the last one I want to cover is you spoke about how Mkhitaryan was kind of respected by both fan bases, and this player I think is in a similar boat is Danny Welbeck, who played for both teams, was successful for both teams. Obviously now still playing with Brighton and perhaps in the best form of his life. Um,
Unbelievable.
Talk to me about Danny Welbeck.
I mean, honestly, the career arc he's had late on is superb, and I think it's a case where injuries and seeing players without injuries is light and day. I think you look at Danny Welbeck at United, think that he was a good, promising player. You know, okay, maybe there'll be areas he can improve at a young age, but it just shows that players can blossom later on. And for me, you know, with Danny Welbeck at Arsenal, obviously that iconic goal against Leicester and the goal against AC Milan and whatnot in the Europa League, but you're dealing with a player who was always really good but just could never quite ride out the injuries. And now you're dealing with a player at Brighton who was in the peak of their powers, the form of their life, a key integral man to that Brighton side where there's a lot of star-studded attackers, João Pedro, Jorginho, Rutter, Adingra, Minter, and so on and so forth. So it says a lot about his quality that he is a complete mainstay. And I'd give him a solid. Well, I can't really rank him because if I say since leaving United or Arsenal, it's not really a fair ranking. If I rank him out of just general football and the level he's at now, you've got a solid 8 out of 10 and a brilliant
Yeah,
career.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Well, let us know in the comments a player perhaps that left your team for a rival, which one left those sour grapes in your mouth the most? Let us know in the comments. So Thursday takes us back into a player spotlight, and it is what is now going to be known as the Dominic Solanke derby as Tottenham head to the south
Oh,
coast to take on Bournemouth. Of course, Solanke left Bournemouth for Tottenham for what was it, about 60 million in the summer, and I think firstly we're going to cover Dominic Solanke, and then we're going to cover his replacement Evan Nilsson as well. But for Solanke, I mean, in the Premier League, 4 goals, 2 assists. For those who are crazy about stats, they might think that he's not living up to the price or the hype at the moment. But for me, as a Tottenham fan, I've watched pretty much every Tottenham game this season, and when I heard that we were linked with him, I wasn't too impressed. But now I see why Ange wanted him so much because when I say this player suits our system down to the ground, I couldn't say it anymore because like I know that his goals and stats aren't there. I mean, still 6 goal contributions in 10 games isn't the worst, considering he's missed a couple of games as well. But his work rate and his off the ball work rate is just incredible, and it absolutely suits our system down to the ground because his high press allows everyone else to high press. His hold up play is fantastic, and he just allows everyone else, like the Sons, the Madisons, everyone else. He allows them all to come into the game. So for me, Solanke's been absolutely brilliant, and hopefully he gets a warm reception when he returns to Bournemouth. I mean, what do you reckon, Matt? Do you think he'll get booed, or do you reckon he'll have a warm reception?
I mean, it's difficult to say, isn't it, really? I think, it's kind of the football food chain that it happens that, players who thrive at mid table clubs or lower do end up moving to top six clubs or better. And I think, I completely agree with what you said about Dominic Solanke. And I think what I've been quite a big fan of his for quite a few years. And when I saw Spurs were getting him, I was kind of like, I don't mind it because from a football perspective, I think he's a brilliant player and I think it's a great signing for Spurs. From an Arsenal fan perspective, it's like, I'd kind of rather he went somewhere else. But I do really like him, and it's hilarious as the Dom Solanke derby. And I think you look at like 2 years ago or so, even when Bournemouth weren't as good as they are now, he was still thriving. His all-round game was brilliant. His link-up play, like a good finisher, but he's taken that to another level too. And last season, the confidence in front of goal, his link-up play, as I say, the ability to bring others into the game. He's a brilliant player, and I think that 65 million fee, which Spurs did pay, is worth it. But you've touched on Solanke. Let's touch on his opponent for the day or for the evening, Evan Nilsson, coming from Porto for quite a big fee. A few eyebrows raised, but he's done quite well on the whole. I think scored a few pretty important goals recently. Obviously, got Saliba sent off against Arsenal as well. And he's found his feet recently. It's not always easy for a player coming from abroad to the Premier League to bed it instantly. But what have you thought about him so far?
I think that, I mean, firstly, for a club like Bournemouth who have risen, as they have, they, play in a stadium whose, I mean, capacity is under 15,000. It's for them to spend that kind of money on a player that was so prominent in a major league like Portugal is a big step for them. And I was worried for him that he wouldn't be able to adapt to the Premier League. And when he missed a penalty against Chelsea for the chance for his first goal, I was like, oh God, is this going to be one of the just one of those stories who players come over for a big price and he hasn't been able to live up to the billing? But fair play to him. He's got I think maybe 3 or 4 goals now, and he's kind of finding his feet in that team. So it looks like Bournemouth have got their replacement, which is great for them. And Bournemouth, Iriola's done a fantastic job there. I know that when they
Oh,
sacked O'Neill last season, it was a bit of a controversial one because O'Neill was looked at quite highly, but Iriola's done a brilliant job, and he's given Evan Nilsson bags of potential. So it's going to be a tough game for Tottenham, as any opponent will know down at Bournemouth. Arsenal and City have already lost there this season. But yeah, I think Evan Nilsson and Solanke, you're going to see two informed strikers going head to head on Thursday.
talking of billing, no, I'm joking. That's all you're getting for that's all you're getting for Thursday. Friday night, the weekend's on the horizon. Football does not stop though, and we've got a classic to talk to you about. Well, more of a player spotlight here with Charles de Ketelaeres and Atalanta playing against AC Milan. High flying Atalanta, Gasperini's Atalanta. We've said that for so many years, and what that manager continues to do, continues to bring new players in, continues to adapt, continues to be free flowing, brilliant to watch. Their position in the Champions League table, the Serie A table, how fun they are to watch. You've got players like Retegui, Adamola Lookman, and Charles de Ketelaere, for me, just emphasises how important environment is playing against his former club, AC Milan, who had him for a few years but couldn't quite get the best out of him. And now you've got Charles de Ketelaere, who just last week against Young Boys broke the Champions or equaled the Champions League record to get 5 goal contributions in a single game, which is completely
Crazy.
bonkers. Away from home against Young Boys, 6-1, ridiculous. But what I want to more allude to is one, amazing Charles de Ketelaere. If there's an environment to succeed at, it is Atalanta, it is under Gasperini. But what I want to more allude to is the importance of environment in football. How important do you think environment is in football, Junior?
I think it's massive. I mean, you can have players that go to the big clubs, but it just doesn't work out. I mean, we spoke about Sanchez at United earlier.
Yeah.
The environment and everything around you, it has to all fit. And when you actually take that into account, how many variables there are, it's when a player clicks with a club, it makes it even more emphatic, the fact that it has done well. And obviously, what how do you pronounce his name?
Gasparini.
Gasperini. What Gasperini has done at Atalanta is obviously brilliant. They won the Europa League last year, the only team in
Oh,
any competition to beat Leverkusen. And he's obviously just built a really good environment where the midfielder's gone in there and felt very comfortable. And it shows as well, like Atalanta are one of 6 teams in Serie A who are at the top of the table, separated by 5 points, which is
what a league.
yeah, it makes for mouthwater and stuff. Unfortunately, AC Milan actually aren't in that sixth. They're seventh right now. I think 5 points adrift of Juve in sixth. So it'll be a big fixture for AC, who will want to be picking up some points and getting involved. But yeah, to kind of round off your point, I think that environment's very important for a player. They want to feel comfortable, because when they feel comfortable, that's when they play their best football.
And I think as well, to add with environment, is player profiling. I think you look at AC Milan, signing a false nine type of player who is almost in the Kai Havertz mould of player, where you
Mm-hmm.
think, where is his best position? And you can just see quite how managers can get the best out of these sort of players. These really technically gifted, tall players, but really technical, really clever players. Almost like shadow second striker ilk. And yeah, it's great to see players thriving, particularly when they go through tougher times. Well, tougher times in contrast, or in the context of football. Saturday brings us onto the Bundesliga logo. Well, not really. Of Harry Kane, Englishman, Bayern Munich's talisman, one of the best number nines in the world for a number of years. Bit of a touchy topic, arguably, for Junior being a Spurs fan, but here we are. And, even as an Arsenal fan, I can appreciate what a special footballer this guy is. And I mentioned that Bundesliga logo. If you haven't seen it already, the goal he scores to stretch out, control the ball, and then put it into an empty net is just ridiculous and
Brilliant goal for the hat trick as well.
absurd. And that's basically solidified him being the fastest player to ever reach 50 goals in the Bundesliga. And you can't take that stat lightly. You've got Robert Lewandowski, you've got Aubameyang, you've got Robben, you've got so many A-star attacking players. So for him to do that is pretty special. And what we more want to go on with the player spotlight side of things with Harry Kane here is, what does he need to do in the rest of his career for people to look at him differently? I think there's often a lot of discourse about the trophy narrative, and personally I feel like it's a bit lazy. I feel like it's a bit boring, because at the end of the day, football's a team game, and there's only so much that an individual player can do to get you over the line, particularly when, with the greatest of respect, he's played for a club which just aren't quite unanimous for getting over the line. But nonetheless, a super footballer, obviously winning the Euros in the summer would have been phenomenal for him. But
It would have been nice for all of us, I think.
wouldn't have been bad, would it? Wouldn't have been bad. But with Harry Kane Jr., obviously you know him better than anyone as a Spurs fan. I'm sure you absolutely love the bloke. I don't think people have too many hard feelings for him going to Bayern Munich, after it felt like that was almost inevitable for the level he's been at for so many years. But what do you think Harry Kane needs to do in the rest of his career? I don't want to say to, be viewed as like a winner or anything like that, because I think that's a bit cliche. I want to see what you think he can do to be viewed as differently, which maybe separates him from the other elite number nines.
I mean, it's such a tough question, isn't it? I mean, he I feel for him, because I think he's a boyhood Tottenham player, come through the youth academy. I think if it was up to him, he would have stayed with Tottenham throughout his whole career. But I think it's made very well known that Daniel Levy is not an easy man to work with. And I think the fact that he ended up moving abroad to Germany, that would have never been in his plans, but it kind of shows how desperate he was to move away, that he would have taken any move. And I think it's a shame, because I think that the kind of headlines have got into his head a little bit about the fact that he needs to win a trophy, or he needs to win something to be a success. I think Harry Kane is a success. I think he's the greatest number nine in the world, and has been for a number of years. And I think that he's shown that in England. He's now showing that in Germany with and the stats back him up. I think for him, a trophy will come. I believe Munich will win the Bundesliga this year. I feel like normality will resume. I mean, I just
Hilarious.
think it's
That
it's
we
it's
didn't.
it's unfortunate that last year he joined Munich in the same year, Leverkusen had a 1 in a million, league where they went unbeaten, right? So I think
Special.
that that stuff doesn't happen, right? And I think that it's kind of unfortunate that Kane joined Munich at that time, but Munich look like a different animal again this season. Under the reins of company now, there was a lot of question marks over him. They've made some great signings, but they're flying in the Bundesliga, and I think he'll get his trophy. I think he'll win the Bundesliga this year. Maybe they could compete for the Champions League title as well. But I think for me personally, I think he's a success no matter what happens. His records show that, but also the kind of player he is. He's England captain, but he always represents himself the right way, represents his nation the right way. He never really puts a foot wrong. So in my eyes, he's a success already. But I do hope he does get that trophy.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what you're saying. And as I say, I think the trophy narrative can be a bit lazy. But one other
Yeah.
cross point, you mentioned him being so integral for England. Is there an argument that he might end up very soon being phased out of the England setup? You look at obviously Bukayo Saka, who's an undeniable starter. You've got Jude Bellingham, who's an undeniable starter. You've got Cole Palmer, who arguably should be an undeniable starter. And you've got a whole host of top other players, looking at just the number 9 position, you've got Ollie Watkins, Jared Bowen, so many top options. Is there going to come a time where Harry Kane's time isn't up, so to speak? But, particularly well, obviously Thomas Tuchel, working together at Bayern, that'll definitely help his case. Do you
Mm.
think it's going to get to a point sooner that Harry Kane gets phased slightly out of the England setup, or at least isn't as important to England? Or do you think he is still completely integral?
I think it completely depends on Tuchel and his system because we saw in the Euros where under Southgate, the way England played, the system England played, part of Kane's game, not only does he score goals, and this is why I think he's the best striker in the world. Not only does he score goals, but his complete play as a forward is brilliant. His hold up play, his passing range is fantastic, and he does like to drop off and play those passes. Now for England under Southgate, what where it kind of there was so many question marks and frustrations over Kane was that he would drop deep, but we didn't play a system where he had runners off him.
Yeah.
So he dropped deep and it didn't work. Whereas when he was at Tottenham, he'd drop deep and you'd have the likes of Son running off him, and it worked so well. So I honestly think it just depends on Tuchel and his system because Kane, by far and away, is good enough to be in that England squad, and he's a goal scorer, and it'd be stupid not to be starting him. But if he doesn't fit Tuchel's system, then as we've seen in the summer, we kind of had too many superstars, and
Yeah.
Southgate was trying to fit them all in, and it didn't work. So I'm not against the idea of having a couple of star players on the bench if it suits the system better, because I think that the team will perform better if everyone is suited to the system rather than just trying to squeeze in all of your star players that you can.
One final question. You mentioned that he drops deep a lot. Do you think that's a
Mm.
bit of a detriment, particularly to the national team? Not really getting as many goals as he's previously got, particularly with that England side, particularly with the way they were set up, as you say, without runners. Do you think that's becoming a slight bit of a detriment on an international level?
Potentially. I mean, it's such a tough one because obviously now where he's getting older as well. I mean, he wasn't really kind of fast to begin with, but
Yeah.
his pace is going a little bit. So the more he drops deep, the more he's not in that final third. But again, it depends on the players he has around him. If we're playing a system where we've got good fast wingers running off of him, then I think it's fine and I think it will work. But if we don't have that system, then he'll either have to change the way he plays, or Tuchel will have to look at starting a Watkins or a Solanke or someone else up top. I mean, what will be interesting, and I guess something that I'd like to ask you is, do you think England, where we've now got so many, almost too many like number 10s, those kind of attacking players, do you think you could see England go into a system where we kind of have 6 midfielders rather than an out and out striker, and we kind of go fluid up top?
It's an interesting question. I think if England had persisted with Lee Carsley, I think you'd probably be pointing towards a yes. But
Mm.
given Thomas Tuchel is back, obviously he loves to play that free back. But he's also quite an adept manager. He's been very versatile throughout his career, although since Chelsea it's been more pragmatic. But I think England have so many top players, and a few which for me are no brainers to build around: Trent Alexander-Arnold, Bukayo Saka, Cole Palmer, and Jude Bellingham. Those are the four for me, which are no brainers to build around. And if you put those pieces in, and then you feel like England lack the balance and you need more midfielders, absolutely. And if you feel that they've got enough balance and stability, which is all it really comes down to, as we saw in the Euros and how important football is in general, or balance is in football in general, then we can go from there and see. And I just want to end this little segment off asking yourself, proper throwing you on the spot here, but it shouldn't be too difficult with some of the names he's played for, in particular a certain South Korean. And to everyone watching, I want to know, talking of Harry Kane, out of everyone he's played in his career, England, Bayern Munich, Tottenham, what is your favourite wing pairing he has ever played with? Let us know.
So, into our seventh and final day of the week, Sunday. What a week of football we're going to have.
Oof.
And we're rounding it off with a belter. Two teams based in England's capital who, let's not sugarcoat it, hate each other. Tottenham and Chelsea will go to battle once again. And the highlight of this one is going to be fixture history, because I'm going to highlight four fixtures in this fixtures history over the last 16 years that have well, for me as a Tottenham fan, they've made me feel very different emotions. But I'm going to take you back, Matt, all the way back to 2008. A certain day in February at Wembley, where Tottenham overturned Chelsea 2-1 to win at the League Cup. Of course, a lot is spoken about Tottenham and how their lack of trophies, and perhaps they should have more in their locker. That was the last one they won.
Crazy.
I mean, talk to me about, obviously, it's now 16 years since they won a trophy. How important do you think it is for Tottenham to get one in the cabinet?
I think it definitely is, but I think what's more important is the general direction of the club. I think people obsessed with the trophy narrative, which 100% for a team like Spurs, they can't really be in a position where they're going that long without a trophy, as you say, 2008. But I do also think it's really important that they're going in the right direction. So if they won a trophy under Conte, for example, they win, I don't know, a League Cup, let's say, and then aren't really in a better position, the next manager comes in and they feel like they're stagnating or they're back to square one, then, you've kind of got issues. Okay, yeah, they've got a trophy to sugarcoat things, as Ole Gunnar Solskjaer once said. They can, paper over the cracks, as we've seen with Man United and Ten Hag recently. But I think it's all about the direction of the club, because I feel like if you're sustainable, you deserve to win things and you deserve to win games, and you get good momentum going together, you will get what you eventually deserve. And in Spurs' case, that might be a League Cup, that might be a Europa League. I think the problem is they're not really the type of team which is going to be all out game management and being that decisive side when it matters in the key moments. But that's the fun of Spurs. Obviously Pochettino's Spurs were an incredibly fun side to watch, but never quite got over the line. And just Spurs, in terms of identity and the way they play, I'm sure you'll agree, is very Tottenham feeling. Very fun to watch, quite aggressive, quite front-footed. But will it be the difference to get over the line? And which Spurs, obviously, fans are desperate to see their team win silverware. But we'll just have to see, really, with Spurs continuing in the right direction. And obviously that game against Chelsea will be quite a significant one to not even as a one which impacts the league table or trophies hugely, more just like the bragging rights and the stature of the fixture and the way Spurs just often capitulate when they happen to meet a certain team in London wearing blue.
Well, we will speak about a couple of those fixtures in just a moment, but before those, we're going to take it back a little bit to 2015, to New Year's Day, where Tottenham host Chelsea, this time at White Hart Lane, and Harry Kane leads Tottenham to a 5-3 victory. Now, this game for me was one that I was massively impressed with. This was the Chelsea era where they had Diego Costa, Eden Hazard, John Terry, Thibaut Courtois. They were in their one of their primes. They've had many primes, Chelsea. This was one of them. That team, winning a couple of trophies, and they were always so defensively sound. And I just remember this game, Harry Kane, I mean, he'd already put his name on the map, but just really showed the kind of player he was. He scored a couple of goals. I think he sat down John Terry for one of them as well. Just a really, really solid, strong Tottenham performance. So that is one of the ones I want to highlight. The next one, moving on a few years, is probably one of the most famous ones. We kind of go back to.
I know where this is
Leicester.
coming.
the Leicester winning year in 2016, where the Battle of the Bridge, as it became known, Chelsea 2, Tottenham 2. Tottenham obviously battling Leicester, trying to chase Leicester for the Premier League title, went 2-0 up at Chelsea. Chelsea came back to draw 2-2, thus giving Leicester the crown. And this one was, wow, it was a battle in every sense of the word. Big tackles, some legal illegal stuff on a football
Oh,
pitch. It was a proper scrap, and one that, yeah, I think Pochettino's Tottenham, they showed naiveties, and they showed perhaps a lack of experience of being in that kind of position where you're 2-0 up in a game like that. You kind of try and see it out, but unfortunately they weren't able to do so. And yeah, the rest was history for Leicester. What do you remember of that game?
completely mental. I mean, obviously Arsenal were in amongst that title race too, but it came down to that game being the game which could essentially win Leicester the title. And I remember just Spurs very much losing their heads. When that game, even before, to be fair, it was 2-2. It felt like they were very emotional in that game,
Yeah.
and to see Eden Hazard absolutely rattle one top corner the way he even talks about it to this day, it must be such a bitter pill for Spurs fans. And obviously, as an Arsenal fan, watching that moment was completely special, knowing that if we're not going to win the league, then Leicester having their fairy tale story, and obviously not being Spurs. And that moment, as you say, what an iconic game, and that goal, football folklore. What else is there to say?
It was a fantastic goal from a fantastic player. I mean, Hazard is, yeah, just absolute quality player, one of the Premier League's best, really. But I'm going to
Easily.
move swiftly on before I get too emotional about that fixture because it still hurts me.
I'll spare you
And
a tissue. Don't worry about it.
the last one we're going to come to is a really interesting one, to be honest, because you look at the score line, but I also, it's Tottenham Chelsea last season, Ange's first season in charge. I think it was match day 9, match day 10. Tottenham unbeaten at this point. Chelsea managed by Pochettino go in to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and Chelsea win 4-1 in what was one of the maddest games I think in Premier League history. Tottenham went down to 9 men, got two red cards, loads of offside goals. Nicholas Jackson scored a hat trick, but got like a 7.3 rating or something. Like
Oh,
it just had everything. But my feelings from that game were almost a sense of pride. I know that we just lost, but I think it showed him the fans in the stadium as well that Ange was, it was that game where Ange was like, look, I'm going to stick to my guns. I'm going to play the way we play, and I I was very proud of the team that day. Obviously the goals kind of went in late, and when you're playing with 9 men, it's going to happen. But I just loved that Ange was like, look, this is how I'm going to play, guys. I'm not going to change my way. And love him or loathe him for that. Some people call him stubborn. It's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because some people will say he's stubborn, but then if it pays off, look at the weekend, beat City away 4-0. We didn't do that by playing conventionally.
bonkers.
It's one of those. So for me, that fixture, even though it was a loss, it kind of made me go, okay, this is how we're going to play now. And I really don't hate that. I really don't hate that because if you have 10 men, if you have one man less, who's to say that you're not going to win the game? I know that we didn't, but the way we were playing, there were chances at 2-1 and at 3-1. So that one for me. I mean, talk to me about your point of view of that game. Obviously, it's two rival teams, but what did you make of it?
I personally thought it was pretty naive. Like I thought that it's very interesting as well with the beauty of this series and football in general is the contrasting opinions. But I thought it was very naive in the sense of I understand you stick to your principles, but sometimes you kind of just got to be have a bit of common sense and a bit of almost respecting yourself a tiny bit. And that game was completely comedic because, as you say, Spurs went down to 9 men, and it felt like Spurs were still playing on the halfway line at every given opportunity. And the amount of times it felt Chelsea were in behind, but they weren't in behind because they didn't quite time the run right. This was when Vicario was in his utmost honeymoon period as well, of just being
Yeah,
unbelievable. And it almost just reiterated how much of a hilarious fixture this is for Tottenham. And I don't say that in a way of liking Chelsea particularly, obviously, no. But, you look at Chelsea versus Spurs all the time. I remember Oliver Skipp scored in a 2-0 win a few years ago, but past that, I don't remember Spurs ever getting the better of Chelsea in a very good while. And it just says it all about how much some fixtures just stay true to their way. And it's almost unbelievable to think that this fixture for Spurs is always so difficult. And to be fair, I don't see it being too different with the way styles are and the way Chelsea thrive against a lot of open space.
Yeah, it's one of those where, like, I mean, obviously we kind of touched on a couple of occasions Tottenham were successful, but they were, 10 odd years ago. I remember there was a little period where Poch was with us, and we had a couple of victories against them, both home and away. I remember Dele Alli thrived in this fixture. He always seemed to score in this fixture, but
Yep.
yeah, ultimately it always kind of does seem like they have their number, similar to how we are with City.
Yeah.
Every team kind of has that kind of bogey team, but it always throws up something. And so, yeah, to round off this first video, to have a Tottenham v Chelsea fixture on the Sunday, we can't recommend enough that everyone watches, because no doubt you're going to need your popcorn.
Be an absolute classic, won't it? But as you
It
say,
really,
I think that will pretty much be it for today's first episode. It's been an absolute pleasure, Junior.
absolutely, Matt. I mean, the first of many, I hope.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, it just, what it does is really shines a light on a lot of games you might not think as much of. The history between them, the amount of different players who've played for both sides. I mean, Dani Osvaldo, what a pick! If you knew that he played for both sides, or you even had any kind of inkling that that'll be the player we'd speak about, I'd love to hear. But no, it has been a pleasure, and I look forward to many more. And yeah,
I mean, absolutely, yeah. Like, obviously, this is the first episode of this series. So, if you guys in the comments have any sort of feedback, if there's a fixture or a player who's played in a fixture in next week that you want us to touch upon, leave it in the comments. And yeah, if you have any feedback, of course, we're welcome to it. This is a new series, but one that we hope will take off and that you guys will enjoy. So yeah, leave your comments down below if you'd like to have us look on a fixture next week. Please, of course, like the video if you did, share it around, and subscribe to the Striver channel. And we'll see you in the next one.